Hello, welcome to Miniatures. My name is Stuart and welcome to a bit of a painting tutorial. I'm trying to increase the number of tutorials on the website. Being a commissioned painter, it's nice to share some of the things that I do. There no way will any of these tutorials be a definitive way that you should or shouldn't do something. It's just the way I do things, and that may or may not be useful to some of you. Hopefully it will be useful. So today I'm going to be painting one of Saraissa Precision's North American buildings. This is a 15mm version, which sort of was released as part or in conjunction with WWII Games' Epic Battles American Civil War release. It was one of the sort of second or third wave of buildings they released, available on their website and I believe through WWII Games as well. And I think this one is £10. I'm a big fan of Saraissa kits. They're always engineered extremely well. Good quality instructions, go together well. And are generally a joy to work with. So if you can excuse the whirring away of my airbrush compressor in the background there, we will be using it shortly for the first stage of this. So I've primed the building black using a rattle can. It is MDF or HDF or whatever you want to call it. It will soak a little bit of that in. I haven't used the primers, the specific primers you can get for them. I don't tend to do that, but this black primer has done what it needs to, which has given me a base layer and also given me a black that's going to be the base shadows and all the recesses, and I'm going to do a zenithal highlight or pre-shade or pre-highlight, depending on however you want to describe it, with this miniature using the airbrush. You can also achieve this with a rattle can as well, and I'm just going to do grey rather than white, and it will basically mean airbrushing down mostly from the top, but I am going to get a good coverage on the sides as well. So it'll look mostly grey at the end, but it'll leave a little bit of black in the shadows, and it'll just give me a really nice base to work from. And then I'm going to paint afterwards using pretty much all contrast paints. I use contrast paints a lot in my tutorials. It's just something I'm using a lot at the moment. I don't always paint with contrast. Again, it's just I find them really easy to use, really versatile, and a great way of weathering and making a building have some character without it taking an awful long time at all. So anyway, let's cut to the first stage. So I'm going to start with using this Scalecolour graphite. You can use any grey, really can use any grey. I've opted for something that's kind of mid to light in its shade, just because it will best suit what I'm going to do with it afterwards. So I've done a very light first pass, and what I want to do now is just go in and just reinforce it in some areas, mainly picking up where I want it to be a bit lighter, or in reverse, leaving it where I want it to be darker. So underneath the overhang of the roof there, I want it to just be a tiny bit darker, so I've just left it in that way. Just picking out the doors a bit. And there we go. So a little bit lighter, a little bit patchy on the roof, and that's deliberate. It will help me with the shading later on when I put the contrast paint on. But overall, you can achieve this with a rattle can for black and then a rattle can for grey. And if you're in the UK, the good old Halford's grey and black primers will suit you fine there. Right then, so next stage will be starting the first colour with contrast. So I'm going to try and make it a similar paint scheme to what you saw with the image I put up at the beginning of the video, but I'm not trying to copy it exactly, just inspired by it, mainly because it looks good, and it saves me trying to think of what colours to paint it. So for the main body of the building, so to speak, I'm going to be using primarily contrast Aggaros Dunes, and that's a kind of a mix between like a bone colour and more of a leatherish colour. I think it sits sort of in between contrast Snakebite Leather and contrast Skeleton Horde. Now I've got a clean pot of water with me just off camera, and I've also got a paper towel, and the way I tend to work with contrast paint is to try and work with it quite fluidly, and it might mean using a clean brush to add streaks in and remove paint pooling as well. I'm just missing off the lintels there. Quick clean of the brush, just because I want to blend this in a little bit, because it creates a bit of natural sort of texture into the building. I do want to just mist these bits of what would be exposed brick and paint them in a different colour, so it's probably quite a little tricky area there. So that's given me a basic covering, and it is patchy and deliberately so, because I want the walls to look weathered, and it's about trusting the process as we go now, because that looks like a thin coat. So what I'm going to do now is go in with some slightly heavier areas of contrast Snakebite Leather, and just kind of blend it in and just build up the texture. Again, applying water to thin it out as I go. So dabbing the paint in, wetting the brush, and just blending it out. And this seems like a lot of flash, but it's actually really easy to do, and you'll get a really, really nice effect at the end of it. Still building up the layers really, really quickly. It's probably only taken me about 10 minutes to do the whole thing so far, and we're going to continue this time with the Skeleton Horde, which is the lighter version. And again, just a thin layer over most of it, leave it a bit patchy in places. And what you'll end up with is a fairly sort of multi-toned outside main colour for the building. And it'll look a bit patchy and a little bit odd, but by the time we finish the rest of the building and we've done all the effects and the weathering and things on it, the patchiness will make sense. So that's those 3 layers dried, and now what I'm doing is actually adding another layer to the outside of the building. And I'm using Nazdreg Yellow. That just adds a little bit of warmth and further toning. So next up, I'm going to use Gore-Grunta Fur Contrast. I'm painting all the lintels and the steps and the loose brick areas. So that's the Gore-Grunta Fur on, and now the contrast black Templar. I'm going to be hitting the roof with that to start with. Both roofs, the edges of the chimney stacks as well. And I'll try and keep my brush strokes all in one direction for this. And then a clean brush, just go in. Just create some subtle tonal changes, but then the direction of travel for any rain would obviously run down off the roof. So I want to make sure my brush strokes all go that way. So that's still drying. It will dry slightly streaky, which was deliberate, and I will add more colours a bit later on when we get onto the weathering side of it. Same colour now. Just going to go in and paint in all the windows. And I'm going to be lazy and leave the frames as they are in that grey, and that'll look fine once I've painted the windows in. So you just got to take your time really, and just paint in each window like that. So we nearly finished the base layers now. I'm going to paint in all the doors contrast Militarium Green. So the next stage is going to be picking out some of the window frames. Now they're already in grey left from the prime, and I've just painted the windows in. So I don't want to spend too much time painting in the whole window, but I'm going to use a little bit of Game Air white. It's dead white. It's quite thin, works really well for control. And use a very small brush. You can use a 0. And I'm just going to paint in vertical lines on each to match the inside parts of the frames, not the edges on the outside, and then horizontal lines depending on how many there are. So you're just trying to do a bit of a hash mark always. So a really faint mark, and all it's doing is just lifting it slightly and making the impression of a bit of light shining in the middle. So that's the frames filled in. Next we're going to do a little bit of sponge chipping on the outside of the building. The way I'm going to do that is to use some sponge you get in blister packs. Got some little bits broken up in here as well, and some tweezers. It's sometimes handy for the smaller parts. And I just want to add some texture to the outside of the building. So I'm going to start with the orange area, sort of the brickish areas, and the yellow area as well. Got two colours to start with. So got model colour, Japanese uniform, World War II, and then orange brown model colour as well. And we're going to start by dipping your sponge in some paint, and then pressing it onto some clean foam, some clean kitchen towel, until you've taken most of the paint off. And you can just see what it'll be like when you chip away. And then just tapping it on the model, it just leaves little marks and things on the building. You'd be surprised at what it looks like when you finish building up a few layers of it. I mostly use this on sort of armour, World War II tanks and 40k and things like that. Anything where you can chipping paintwork off things, but it can work surprisingly well just by creating texture on flatter surfaces like the MDF. Now, one of the options would obviously be to texture this before I painted it, but I like to get them on the table a little bit quicker. So this is another way around of adding a little bit of something to your miniatures. Now onto the same thing, but with the Japanese uniform, and I'm primarily aiming at the yellower parts of the building here. Start very gently. You can always add more, it's harder to take off. I'm actually going to go in with a third colour now. Any kind of beige colour will do. I'm going to use Warfront Camo Yellow Sand here. And remember what we're trying to do here, we're not necessarily trying to represent any particular part of the building with this. It is building texture through colour. So it's not supposed to be realistic in the sense that you can say, well, show me a building with little white and yellow and orange dots on. That's not what this is about. It's about creating something that works on the tabletop. And adding those spots of colour just makes it look a lot more 3D, makes it look like built up dirt and things, and we will tone some of it down in a moment. Even putting some little bits on the roof to represent, it could be bird nest, it could be anything. It's, you look at a building, you've got lots of marks in the brickwork, those little imperfections and things, This is just a really quick way of achieving something like that. We will put some further washes and weathering on, which will tone this down somewhat, but still keep the majority of it there. So back to the contrast paint again. I'm going to use some contrast Creed Camo. It's quite a dark green, and I've used it on previous buildings. I'm just giving the suggestion of moss and lichen and things growing, so you can do it on the roof. You can buy all kinds of effects, and I've used lots of them as well on tanks and armour and things like that, but contrast can be really versatile just for this kind of very organic styles of painting. You're almost treating it like you're painting a watercolour or something at times. When it dries, those green areas just look really good on the roof. Hopefully you'll see the effects start to build, and trust the weird process. And you can also use it to tone down as well, so any areas you think, well, I might have gone a little bit heavier on the yellow there. So that green layer has really toned the sponging down and added quite a lot of grime and texture as well. So the streaking is all in a vertical angle, as if the direction of rain when it rained. Now, so the next thing is the end of the painting really. The next stages are very much to add some final touches and textures. So I'm going to use one of my favourites, so Vallejo thick mud acrylic paint. And I use this on my bases for my American Civil War. I'm used on a lot of the terrain, and it just helps tie everything in together. So I'm just going to get a little bit on my brush and just add it around the edge of the model. So that thick mud now is dry. I'm just going to add a little bit of dry pigment now. So a light seller, I use this stuff a lot. I'm going to brush it in dry, not too thick, so you don't want it to be coming up on your fingers too much afterwards. But it's just another way of adding a little bit of texture to a building. Not going to go everywhere. Going to go over the thick mud texture. Because most of this is coming off, I won't worry about fixing. Right, we are practically there now. One final part, and these are the 2mm tufts I'm using on the bases for my American Civil War things. I'm using them on my Napoleonics as well. So war paint figures, 2mm tufts, winter and dead grass. I've picked them for the colour, not the season. I mentioned that on previous videos. I'm actually just going to get a couple, cut them in half and stick them to the edge of the building. So here we go. So by cutting them in half, you get a nice little flat edge along the bottom there. And there we are, that's the forebuilding done. Now in total paint time, if I remove the fact I was filming, I could paint that in an hour, no problem at all. Contrast paints just make it very, very easier to kind of build in the textures and things, but do it really, really quickly and easily. And if you're the kind of person that likes working a bit organically, maybe you like painting, maybe you do watercolours or drawing or something like that, so you quite like the idea of just sort of playing around on it, you can get really, really nice effects very, very easily. There's no real skill with what I've done there. It's all just very, very basic technique. So just slapping it on with a fairly large brush. I was using a size 2 most of the time. The only tricky bit might be the painting of the inside of the window frames, but you can leave that part anyway. Sponge chipping anyone can do. Well, sponging, it's not really chipping in this case, I suppose. Sponging anyone can do. Slapping on texture paint anyone can do. Slapping on dry pigment powder anyone can do, and the same with the tufts and things. So it's just all about thinking outside the box sometimes and using the tools around you. And I just found that by using the sort of zenith or prime or even just grey, using the light that's already naturally there, and then using contrast paint, and don't be frightened to sort of go back in with a wet brush and just sort of spread it out and thin it out and play around with it. And worst case scenario, you have a go on a building like this and it doesn't work out, just spray it black ink and paint it the way you normally would. It's you're not obscuring detail really when you're painting like this. So if you enjoyed the video, think about giving us a like, giving us a subscribe if you haven't already. There'll be plenty of tutorials for painting miniatures and buildings and terrain and things moving forward. Have a look back at my back catalogue if you haven't already done so. And thanks for watching this video. I'll catch you soon.